Test. 1, 2, 3.
Gotcha.
Yes.
All right, we got
Okay.
it.
It's the small things in life that makes city clerks happy.
Very true, Paul.
Are we ready, Cindy?
We're missing one council member,
Okay.
and I think we're reaching out.
Okay.
We can start if you'd like.
Okay, and I have some reading to do on the remote issue. So I'll just jump in and call to order the City of St. Helena Special City Council meeting Wednesday, July 8th at 3 p.m. in accordance with Executive Orders N-25-20, N-29-20, and guidance from the California Department of Public Health on gatherings. Remote public participation is allowed. We will address the order in the following ways. Members of the public may not physically attend meetings. The City Council meeting will be live streamed on Comcast Channel 28 and on the city's website, barring technical difficulties. Those members of the public wishing to participate must do so remotely via Zoom electronic meetings in the following ways: by either logging onto the Zoom link located on the meeting agenda. Please download the app to your computer or mobile device and enter the meeting ID, or by calling a listed number and enter the meeting ID. Public comment for City Council meetings will be accepted via email to publiccomment@cityofsthelena.org. Please see the end of the agenda for detailed public participation instructions. Amalia, do you have any other thoughts for us on the public participation?
I would just like to remind the public, if you could please list your first and last name for the record very clearly. And you can press *9 if you would like to comment during public comment or public forum. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And now we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would like to mute their microphones and follow with me, place your hand on your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now we'll have our roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here. Here.
Councilmember Koberstein, Knudsen,
Present.
Very good.
Chateau.
Sorry. So now, before we move into public comment, I'm just going to take a moment and remind everybody that, we are still in an emergency state due to COVID-19. Things are intensifying around the state. We want to continue with the messaging and really pushing on the protocol, the social distancing, the masks. We've heard from the county that resource limitations, it's not just a local issue, it's a statewide issue, it's a federal issue. So this long race we're in is still underway. And so I just want to make sure that as we carry on with whatever business we do, that we keep in mind that we are still in a very sort of intense situation regarding COVID-19. So with that, I would invite public comment. Amalia, are we seeing any folks from the
Excuse
public?
me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
public comment at a special meeting
Oh,
is
I'm sorry.
only
I'm sorry.
during,
Yes,
after
I
the
appreciate
item.
Yes, thank you. So when we get into the item, we will bring in public comment. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so we will move into our item here. This is the review and discussion of City Council 3-year goals and our 2020 work plan. And this is Mark Prestwich, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. Joining us today, we have our executive team, and appreciate their availability to answer any questions and to clarify a few issues as we walk through today's discussion. I want you to imagine it's January 2020. We're sitting in the fire training room There's never been any smoke damage to City Hall. We're not in a phased relocation to an interim City Hall. There's no global pandemic that begins in March. It's January 2020, and we're about to begin a discussion about our work plan. If only.
Did we lose Mark?
Can you hear me?
There we go.
I think we lost you.
We have you now.
Uh-oh. What did you hear last?
January 2020 and the fire.
Okay.
I heard if only,
If
your
only.
last word.
Okay. I may need to move this to the other side with something other than Wi-Fi. So if I bring it again,
Um,
If I
breaking
might,
up?
if I can make a recommendation. So St. Helena apparently has been experiencing some spotty reception today. So you might want to call in. That way you can just still participate. And if anyone needs me to read off the phone number, I certainly can.
Would you do that, Cindy, just in case?
I'm looking for it.
You know, this is a good example of why this really is not ideal. Someday we should try to meet socially distanced in the amphitheater at the high school.
I think we can get in there.
I don't think they would let us.
Outside? In the amphitheater?
Oh. How are we going to have?
6 feet away from each other?
The phone number to call
Oh, thank you, Amalia.
is 669-900-6833. And then you'll need the meeting ID, which is 879-960-4416.
Would you repeat that one more time?
Yep. The phone number is 669-900-6833. And the meeting ID is 879-960-4416. Quite a mouthful.
Okay, I think everyone should be able to hear me now.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay, good. So I'm on the phone and also on video here. We're going to begin with a brief PowerPoint that Brit is going to share her screen. And after walking through a couple of slides on the PowerPoint, we're going to move into a careful review of the work plan. We've allocated a couple of hours for this discussion. The work plan can come back to the council for full approval at a future council meeting. But what we want to do is refine the work plan today. There will be discussions about dates and assignments and what the specific task is, the discussion of its status, and any other information that we would like to add. We are going to live edit the document in red so that we can track those changes for everyone as we walk through the work plan today. So we'll move to the second slide. I think that's the last slide there before we moved into. So our objectives are to review initially these vision and mission statements. We will review and confirm the city goals that guide the specific tasks, and then we'll take a careful look at the draft 2020 work plan. Next slide. So I won't read this because we've done this a couple of times recently, but this is the city's vision statement and is intended to help guide the work that we do. And I see it as an influencing document for our work plan. So if the council has any comments on this, we can pause and talk about that. And if not, we'll move to a 2-page slide of the city's mission statement.
Any thoughts at this point? Everybody's good?
Well, only that every time we see a vision statement, it has typos in it and grammatical errors. I think one of these days, before the end of my term, we'll get this right, and I'd be happy to rewrite it again for somebody. I don't know if you guys actually take the time to read it, but it doesn't read well. So thank you.
Okay. So let's move into the mission statement. This is a 2-pager. I'll let everyone just read it. And now a page 2. So any comments on the city's mission statement?
Any thoughts? Anybody? I'm not seeing. Okay. I think we're
This slide, am I the only one where I'm not seeing the full slide? It's being edited out on the outside, or is it me?
Probably you. What type?
Yeah, your
What
device
type of-
did.
Okay.
Okay, let's move to the next slide, Priya. So we'll be working off of this document, which is attached to the staff report today. And this is a multi-page specific line-by-item document. Each of the 5 goals that are listed here in yellow are on this next slide in the PowerPoint. So these are the 5 goals that we've been working on. They were adjusted last year. They're very similar to goals dating back to late 2017, 2018, and then they were refined a little bit last year. So the 5 goals are, and in no particular order, improve and maintain safe and reliable city infrastructure with a commitment to environmental stewardship, stabilize, maintain, and improve access to housing, enhance organizational performance and commit to full public participation, ongoing communication, and regional collaboration, ensure long-term economic sustainability while safeguarding St. Helena's unique culture and quality of life, support thriving families, and enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth. So I want to pause here and make sure that these goals, as stated last year, still reflect the core goals influencing our work over the next year.
I have a comment. I mean, I think it's hard to argue with them or think we should dismiss them, but we might want to talk about what we think is most important or what seems to be moving along. And the concept sort of is that everything gets equal treatment and some things seem to need more attention than others. That's my only comment.
Any other comments from council at this point? Anna?
I just had one comment reading that supporting the thriving families. Because we have so many different, it could be supporting thriving families and all people, not to signal it out and still add the rest of it so that it's still focused on youth. Just realizing that we have lots of different people of lots of different ages.
That's, I think, a good point.
And also, I just like the idea of getting all people in there, supporting thriving families and all people. I don't know. I'm not a good wordsmith.
Yeah, so thriving families and all, I don't know if residents is the word, but something, I certainly see your point. And to me, these all help balance sort of a holistic look at what we do, and wanting to push, forward on all at once. We have to come and go on certain things, but having sort of this balanced, holistic approach, I think they're sort of intertwining.
How about support thriving people and families and enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth? What do you think, Councilmember Doring? Because I know this one is so important with the youth initiative that we work on.
I see your point, but I think that there's a potential for diluting the effect of the importance of youth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the focus. When you say people, it becomes sort of wide open. Of course, we want to support all of our people. It really, I don't know, kind of reminds me of other slogans that are out about right now and how we manipulate them and use them. I personally would like to focus on youth and families, and that's the intent of it. So I would be hesitant to dilute that message.
Okay, I understand that.
Could we see the slide again, please?
Maybe we could just rephrase it. I think I understand where Paul is coming from here, and we're talking about youth and the families they live in, and those units, those social units, if I get it correctly. And so maybe we could rephrase it so that the focus is on the youth and, their supportive social structure, whatever that is. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm okay with making adjustments to it to that extent. I just thought that people would be way too broad, but look, I'm not that wedded to this. I didn't create this language, but I think I helped create the value that's sort of imparted in it. But I'm open to whatever suggestions there are.
Another approach here is to begin the sentence with the word enhance and add families to the end of the sentence.
How would that read, Mark?
Enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth, and families, and however you'd like to describe that.
Our youth, families, and community in general, something like that? Or is that too broad, Paul? Does that move it away?
I think we have to think about what the action items are in here and what do we actually think we're going to be doing so that the title and the work underneath it kind of line up. But
We can revisit this when we get to goal. It's listed as goal 5, so we can revisit that if you'd like when we get into the specifics of the work plan.
Yeah, that might give us some time to get a little processing and clarity by moving forward and circling back.
Okay.
Can I
All
add
right.
a comment? A quick comment?
David?
Yeah, thanks. I really want to support Vice Mayor Doring on this. He's the one that originally came up with this add to our goals, and I think that the community is such an important part of what makes our town special. And when I think about the city, I think about the former teen center. I think about the efforts that Parks and Rec are doing to engage children and communities, but I also think that we're missing sort of a health and welfare aspect to this. And I've been consistently disappointed because of COVID and because of Emma Fife about how we basically have no resources for youth that may be in trouble. And I would really like a focus on that moving forward. And I've had some conversations around town about that. And I don't know if this fits in with Vice Mayor Doring's concerns, but I really, let's do something, shall we, really?
Thank you. So yeah, as we circle into that, let's look and what are the action items, as Ms. Cobra, or as Mary said, and as we get into that item, start identifying tangible steps.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think let's leave that open until we get into the items under there, and then we could revisit that. I'm open to whatever the council wants to do there. So thank you.
So Priya is going to share a spreadsheet, which is attached to the report. We're going to zoom in and out of this spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is organized by color, by goal, and then eventually by color. The green colors that you'll see on this reflect higher priority work plan items that are either in motion or have been directed by the City Council. The yellow items that follow the green are work plan items that may not be completed in 2020 due to competing priorities or focus on other items. And the expectation is as we complete green items, we will then be able to move to yellow items. The red items are really items that remain important to the city that have been previously identified through these conversations, but are recommended for consideration in 2021 or beyond due to competing priorities. There's at least one yellow item that we'll walk through today that is really a green one because we did move forward on that particular item, and we'll visit that in a few minutes. So the plan I had was to walk through these one by one to make sure that they reflect the council's interests. And also we have our staff available to answer any clarifying questions that council members may have. And of course, a couple of these have already been completed. And so we'll see those in the status bar under column E here. The first one, for example, was the support provided to the Revenue Task Force earlier this year. So we know they have finished their report. And we'll talk a little bit later about the follow through on that because I have some notes on about 7 different items that I'm thinking about that have been part of our more recent council communications and probably deserve a spot on the work plan at some point. So does that work for everyone just to walk through these one by one?
I have a comment, just one comment.
Yes, go ahead, Mary.
Because this deals with infrastructure, a lot of it is very detailed about things that are actually in the CIP. And I know we went to that format, I think it was the last time we did goal setting, like maybe 18 months ago. I feel like it's sort of clogging up, what we're supposed to be doing, and I'm more or less trusting the staff to move it along and give us periodic updates. I don't know, other than saying, don't do that project, I don't know how it is helping our workflow. I mean, if you think it is, but I suspect you have something like this internally that you're all working with anyway.
I think the value to keeping it on the work plan is it occupies a part of our daily work. So for example, with Public Works, if we didn't show all of the CIP projects that are taking time out of our staff's day, I think it may conceal how busy the staff is if we don't document all of the various items that are in motion. And so I like the idea of identifying all of those tasks. And then secondly, I think when they get completed, as we finish these specific tasks, it's an acknowledgement that the council and the staff have worked together to complete these tasks and to share that story with our community at the end of the year, or as we touch base on updates periodically.
I think that's a valid point, but I think we all realize how busy the staff is, and in part, maybe it is a PR thing for the community to also realize that. I'm just maybe suggesting it could be a separate thing that gets reported on, but it's not a big issue.
Paul, did you have a comment?
Just a couple, a clarifying comment and question. I have not looked back at prior versions of this document, so I'm wanting to know whether the goal dates have been revised in this edition. That's the first question. And then linked to that is what internal processes occurred with the staff and management if those revisions were made. How were they made, and on what was thinking? Because I'm hoping that the staff went through and looked at these and came up with reasonable goal dates, and not that some deep thought went into this. Otherwise, I don't think we should be doing this process. So that's my concern, that the staff really has to introduce those dates that they feel comfortable that they can achieve. Otherwise, it's just an exercise in futility. So I guess the first question is the most important. Thanks.
Right. Let me give you a little background and context. So the last year's work plan, the 2019 work plan, was brought to the council at the meeting in December. And so from that work plan, the dates that were associated with work that did not finish last year have been revised, and they've been revised twice. First, our staff worked in early 2020 and this is pre-COVID, to update dates associated with these that we felt were reasonable dates. So what I did is I updated it to capture, I updated the goals and the tasks, tried to capture other work that was added, for example, the revenue task force meetings, and incorporate that into the goals, and find a goal that it fit nicely in. And as you'll notice on this worksheet, I do have an other category for items that may not fit nicely into the 5 specific goals, but didn't want to lose focus on a couple of important issues that either the council or the staff were thinking about or working on. When COVID emerged in March, and then we went into an emergency phase, this was parked for a while. And as we began to settle into a new normal with COVID, and we had a 2-phase relocation of the city staff. So our second phase of adding the cubicles to City Hall happened in mid-March, and I had literally just moved into the office the week that I had to leave the office. And so when we entered into a new normal, probably about 4 to 6 weeks ago, as things started to settle down, I went through this again and updated dates and then distributed it to our staff for feedback. I think it's still fair to say that a couple of these are probably a little bit stale and need some adjustment. And I've this past week received a few comments from a couple of staff members on a couple of these items that we'll look at. I think some of the dates, particularly on public works related items, it's such a long list. There are a couple of these items that probably are not going to be finished in 2020. There's just too many active projects happening in 2020. And we can talk about those as we get a little bit farther down the line on the green, because the ones I'm referring to are found, I believe, primarily on page 2 of this document. Is that helpful?
And one thing, Anna?
Oh, no, go ahead, Mayor Ellsworth. I can speak after.
Yeah, one thing I just want to, for me, seeing what we're working on is important, whether it's large or small. It gives us an indication of where we are. And I do think that there's a reasonableness that has to come into the conversation in terms of what we're accomplishing in a new normal situation with COVID, with the COVID coronavirus situation. So it does adjust, in my opinion, how we look at things and what is reasonable. I think moving forward on all these, as many as we can, I think we want to see, for me, I want to see the progress, but I also think as a part of an oversight body, that there needs to be a reasonable understanding of a different dynamic that has occurred over the last number of months. So that's sort of where I am. I do like seeing the information.
I probably have a higher expectation in terms of what is reasonable. And I have the benefit of not running for anything right now. So I'm going to, I get what you're saying, Mayor.
Anna?
Okay, so with that in mind, is there a way for us to have a conversation under this category about climate change and environment and how we add that in, since we do have the fabulous new chapter in our new general plan that addresses climate change in the environment and steps that we can take. Because I've seen that we've been working on this for a while now through the countywide work, and it's very hard to make progress when it doesn't align with our goals. So I would love to have that conversation, if possible, to talk about as a council, is there any way to incorporate some of those ideas into our work plan?
There is some under goal 3.
Right. I was going to mention that with a couple of the general plan chapters, like the climate change chapter, and this was sort of a nod to the notion that there is a region-wide committee that the city is participating in. It may be better to move that specific item to our first goal, the one that does reference environmental stewardship and public health. And so, and these are, I have an update for you on this too, because we have a draft of this that we plan to review with the ATSC, but our staff is taking an early look at trying to distinguish short-term versus longer-term items in the general plan to try to manage the work. So the general plan has, I believe, 51 or 61 initiatives. And what we've done is tried to take about 40% of those, park them in the short-term, lower-hanging fruit, nice return on investment, and initially develop a draft list of what we think is short-term. Others that might take a little longer, about 60% of those initiatives. We want to review those with ATSC and then also ask our council for feedback on those before we begin launching each of those initiatives. There's a lot of additional work. So this particular line item in some ways conceals a lot more work that we could begin working on top of everything you see on this work plan.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mary?
I have a comment on that. I sometimes think that these two goals we're talking about, 1 and 3, we've got stuff in each that belong in the other. I really do. I get what Anna is saying, that goal 1 really deals with environmental stewardship. And goal 3 is talking about organizational performance. And so to me, when I look at this massive list of CIP stuff in goal 1, to me that belongs in goal 3 with some statement of, maintain a list of projects and keep them on time and report to the council every so often. And that, we only really see this like once a quarter, or it might be posted on the website. But all of that and the reasons you're showing it here have to do with transparency and getting work done and organizational performance, which is really goal 3. They just happen to be primarily infrastructure projects. So I kind of like the idea of moving the environmental stuff to here, which is really the subject matter of the goal. I'll be happy to get out my scissors and start rearranging papers.
No doubt, right?
No, I just I think that the long list in 1 is meant to keep track of performance and how this staff is functioning and let us know when things are too stressed and there's too much going on. And I just see it better in goal 3.
Another thought, frankly, would be to separate climate and climate change, because I think that goal is probably going to be expanded, frankly. I'm holding on to my ideas because I don't want to throw more out there, but I can see that as being a goal that will start having its own life. And I know, when you get beyond 5 goals, it gets a little unwieldy, but it seems like we might want to think about a separate goal devoted to climate change.
And as we're headed towards these dates that were in our proclamation, it will start seeping into everything we consider. So highlighting it in a way makes sense, that and sort of designing how it's going to sift down into everything.
I do think it rises to a level of urgency that it should be its own separate goal. And there's much more that we need to start doing in that area. I know that's a start, delivering this and getting some feedback from the ATSC, but we need to have a climate action plan delivered. We need to hire a consultant. That may, some people have a different idea when that should be done, but I'm thinking that this maybe should be a separate goal. I don't think it hurts us or harms us. I just think it emphasizes the seriousness of our predicament.
I agree with that. And we're really talking about taking some things that are already in here in other places and highlighting them as their own goal, and then maybe adding some more to it with realistic timeframes.
Any other thoughts, council here?
No.
Anna?
Just a reminder that we learned on our committee work that we are ahead in some ways as a city above the action plans by having our chapter in our new general plan. There's a lot of good that we can do by looking at that.
In some ways, it's the blueprint for our climate action work. But what we need to do now is organize that blueprint, and that's our first step. So we have an initial draft that is about ready to be presented to ATSC, and from that point, it will be closer to ready to begin to implement those various initiatives and work on those tasks. So I guess the question now is, do we rewrite goal 1 somehow, or create a sixth goal that speaks to climate change of some sort, and then move some of the items in each of these goals that might fit appropriately under a climate action goal and move them under that, and we can pick them off as we walk through the document.
Yes, I
Hard
think.
to do environment, I recognize.
I think as you say, as we move through, we can identify. I think what we're going to see is that it's going to start attaching itself to quite a bit of what we're thinking about. But so I think moving through in a structured way, we can sort of start to visualize how it connects. Anna?
Yes, let's have its own. I heard let's just have its own category from Council Member Doring and Koberstein. So I'm okay with that.
So why don't we call it climate change for now, and we'll come up with something between now and a future council meeting or a follow-up conversation where we can more articulately describe that goal. And if it's okay, begin to walk through the green items here on page 1, and you can let me know, does it belong in the climate change goal? Goal 3 for organizational performance, or alternatively, is it appropriate to leave it in the infrastructure goal? Does that work?
Anna?
Just one more question, because
Sure.
I'm struggling with Councilmember Koberstein when you're wanting to move the pieces from goal 1. To me, they're fitting because of the improve and maintain safe and reliable city infrastructure. So that's the piece with organization development that I'm not comfortable moving it yet, because to me that, especially if we're taking out the environmental stewardship to its own separate thing, that makes sense to fit under that title. So I would just need clarification before we move it over, because I get what you're saying, that it's clogging up seeing what it is that we can make choices on. But I don't want to move it under another title that doesn't make as much sense to me, unless just I need more clarification about that.
I mean, I sort of see it two ways. I see that instead of 10 or 12 lines, there could be something about what's happening administratively to manage these projects and make sure they're on time, and that sort of goes in goal 3, and keep the community advised and whatever, because that all has to do with organizational performance. And then I could see something in here that is much more limited, that talks generally about making advances on the CIP projects. I don't know if it's helping us to see them individually every 3 or 4 months. It's useful. We don't have to get rid of it, but it's not really council work, in my view. It's work that the staff is doing that's really important, and we wanted to keep moving and hear if there's something going wrong. Yeah.
I think it reminds us of what we've got going, even if, you know, just if we're checking in 3 or 4 times a year on it, it could be, in a sense, a separate page that we can refer to at the same time. But certainly for me, and having our community and our council know all the different projects, I think is important. It also, you know, if the effort is in drawdown, you know, if we're talking about climate, then as we look at all these projects, one by one, perhaps we start to link drawdown more closely to each. So I think having it close at hand, even if it, and I do see what you're saying, Mary, that it's about organization and execution and clarifying that, but I do think having the list close at hand is important too.
It's okay. Fine with me.
And I think it's also important that we all feel comfortable with the projects that are being worked on. We want to make sure, and this is really the time to do it, that the work that we're involved in is something that the council wants us involved in. So all of these CIP projects, we didn't start ourselves. The council said this was important, and we're implementing the work. So the council said this was an important policy or issue to work on and directed our staff to do that, and now we're working on those initiatives. So I think most of the items that we see on the list are items that have been asked for by the council. I can probably spot a few of these where we may have suggested that we add something to the list, but we always want to take the time to make sure that the council feels comfortable with our staff time investment in the initiative, whatever that might be.
I think we need to move along. I would just say maybe you overstate that a little bit more than it needed to be. I think many of these items have pre-existed your tenure. Bell Canyon, wastewater treatment plant, York Creek, these are items that had to be done and that were brought back to us. I don't think that we gave direction to do something that's been sort of, these legacy projects have been around for a long time. So there's probably a combination of both council initiated and just things that have been on a list for many years. But
So council members and city staff and city manager, I'm all for clarity. Sometimes to me, clarity is sort of greater reduction rather than greater complexity. And I appreciate Councilmember Vice Mayor Paul Doring's comments and Councilmember Koberstein and Councilmember Chateau's comments about what is the right place, but can we have an overriding principle of clarity regarding sort of our purposes? Because it gets confusing when initiatives fall in all these different buckets. At least to me, my eyes glaze over. And I just would hope that we could be, you know, sort of make it clear from goal to activity to outcome that it's sort of lined up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add one last comment. Most of these things and the project identifiers that they have with them come right out of our budget and come out of the CIP program in our budget that already sort of has a schedule of years and when is money going to be spent. And so we have them in a document that we've already adopted. And just to elaborate on what David said, I think the most important thing is to, you know, prioritize the stuff that's in the budget for this year, keep the council and the community informed. I mean, I would say as much as that, and we have the list here and it can be published separately. I think it just clogs up everything else and tend to lose our focus on some other things.
I agree with that, Mark. I think we could just refer to a more general principle and refer to the CIP on many of these. That will substantially shorten this document. The CIP, has its own scheduling, right? So we could have a goal saying, get the CIP done according to its timelines, so that I do think this long list makes it less clear and hard to articulate to the public. And if we can maybe consolidate that under one general category underneath this goal, CIP, you know, that might be helpful for us to just kind of consolidate this a little bit more and get the clarity I think that we were looking for. I know it's just an idea.
I think it's a good idea, but as long as that CIP is closely linked and it's easy to find, so that when somebody does look at this, they can easily go to the CIP. That was one of the sort of issues that has come up with the COVID situation, when there's so much information out there and so many different places to find it. People can't, they get sent to a different website or sent to a different place. So I think I do get this in terms of clarifying this goal and simplifying it. But as long as that CIP list is very closely linked, so it can be an immediate check-in for somebody who wants to.
For clarification, I'm making the assumption that the council still, some of the the dates on these CIP items are all different. So my thinking is that the council still has an interest in understanding when certain projects are meeting milestones and deadlines, and that capturing that information is important to the council. Is that accurate?
Certainly to me.
If we were to adjust this work plan, and I call it a work plan, so maybe it needs to have a different title, but the work plan title is intended to capture the breadth of work that our staff is working on. So if we were to try to simplify the work plan document, is it still important that we identify for you target goal dates for the completion of various tasks?
Well, aren't they going to be identified in the CIP itself? I know they're all different, right? We probably need to have periodic check-ins with the CIP, like every couple months, right? That's just a different way of doing this. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the dates from the original CIP plan are going to evolve based on, current circumstances. Erica, I don't know if you want to jump in on that. I'm watching you. Did you want to jump in and comment?
Oh, we got a microphone.
Can't hear you.
Double mute there, sorry. We're delivering a lot of these projects by different consultants, so every 2 months, I think a quarterly basis makes sense, having an updated list, because schedules vary from every consultant. So I think the same schedule would make sense for updating it.
I see this sort of as your checklist of the work that's in front of you. And I could see this coming to the council at every meeting or every other meeting. Pretty soon you won't be giving your York Creek Dam reports anymore. There could be a CIP update report. And, there could always be something attached to the agenda. And the information would get out to the community, and the council members would have a chance to ask about something.
We update. We have an internal weekly report that we provide a CFP update once a month. So we could be maybe curtailed to that, and that goes out in an email. But maybe we provide that to council. Definitely could do that.
Just
I've been trying to do that on those Friday updates once a month, more of a CIP update. And frankly, all of, this entire work plan and a CIP plan, or the progress made on the general plan, all of that can be produced into a live document that we update regularly on the website for the council, the staff, and the community to keep track of and have questions answered regularly.
And once it got systematized, would it be efficient for you to do it that way?
I think so.
Anna, did you have?
That sounds great. I would love that. I would love to be able to go to the website and tell people to go there to check. It would make it very transparent. and easy.
So it sounds like that's,
So,
if something like that can be developed, it seems like that would be something that would have a value.
We already have a CIP project page. I'm not sure how accurate it is up to date since we add the projects. But we already have a platform for it. I think it's just a matter of keeping it updated.
Okay.
so it's helpful for me to walk through each of these lists unless we want to pivot. But the value is to identify if it belongs in a CIP list, if the council sees it as a reasonable task or one that needs to be parked or modified. I'm making the assumption that the council wants to have that conversation.
This is why I'm here, certainly, to hear this. So we have thoughts from the council here?
If it's okay, I'll start walking through these.
All of the CIP you're going to walk through?
I don't have to. I mean, I think some of these, I can look at this.
It's pretty obvious. Some of them have CIP codes on them, like most of them.
Mark, is it, in terms of our intent here, is to update us on where we are on projects in terms of shaping our goals? And so for you to get the input you want, this is set up this way because it's, presume it's helpful to you.
No, this has been the work plan and format that the council's had for the past 3 years. So I think in year one, we did itemize the task, the CIP list. In year two, we put them at the bottom in a list outside of the framework of this structure. I don't know that it worked that well because as things got done or finished, I wanted the council to, have the credit for seeing that work complete. But I think the idea of maybe taking the CIP list, putting them in some separate list of CIP associated projects, and then adding anything else that's not a CIP under goal 1 that is reflective of infrastructure or environmental stewardship, we can populate that with, a few items that maybe don't have CIP associated issues with them. So I don't know, for example, Erica, did we list the integrated utility master plan as a CIP item?
No, it's separate. It's
on there.
It's D. It's way back up at D.
But I do think there's a value in terms of us understanding what the current workload is, so that we have a sort of internalize an understanding, and it helps us maybe see how things are integrated. I think if that was our plan today to go through it, it's a value to go through it.
Well, I mean, I can try to quickly move through the ones that are not CIP. So I think D maybe fits that profile. Yep. Erica, let me know if it doesn't. We need to further talk about F because I think we have a financing issue that the finance director, public works director, and I will talk about in about a week and a half or two. G really reflects preparing for the sidewalk project downtown. More of a communications activity. I think U, the conservation easement, is one that's not a formal CIP. Is that right?
Right.
The Public Works Standards, item BB, is not a CIP project.
Right.
And the will serve policy issue, CC, is not a CIP project. I think that probably hits all of those that are not CIP.
Right. There's one on the next.
The
the bike lanes.
item Right. The bike lanes will become a partial CIP project, and we're actively talking about when to schedule the ATSC meeting to review those bike lane options. And then I also wanted to mention that LL, the Grayson South Crane design, that has been approved by council, and we're expecting that to be complete in late 2020. Is that right, Erica?
Correct.
About
December.
So that's one that we would recommend moving back to green because it's an active project.
And that the design done by did you say the end of this year to move into next year? That's our plan?
Right. So we were anticipating perhaps some form of stimulus funding that if that project is designed, it may be a good project to compete for other funding rather than rely on Measure T to advance the reconstruction of those streets. So the council approved the design contract, and we're going to be initiating that soon. And that will include a lot of public outreach as well. So that is, unless there are any modifications, those would be the remaining items that are non-CIP that are at the moment identified under the infrastructure goal.
What about the red stuff?
Well, these are ideas that have been discussed in the past.
I mean, I would think
the red
there. They just won't be prioritized as much, right?
Right. We don't want to lose track of these. These are still important projects that have been, and ideas that have been identified through prior conversations like this. It's more of a capacity issue and trying to prioritize the work so that we keep the focus on the active projects, getting them finished before we move to the yellow and the red projects.
Okay.
Is there anything in the green section where the staff is recommending that it should be removed? I know you're waiting for us to give you direction, but it's sort of, we have to have a discussion. It sounds like there's a couple of issues here, and you're hinting that, hey, this is not reasonable, or we just don't have the finances to get it done in the timeline. I think I want to focus on that. You talked about F, I think, and a couple others. Maybe we should focus on those to see whether they need to be removed or the date substantially moved back. Mark.
So I think we need to do an analysis of revenue to determine how Measure T is performing. And we just don't have great data right now to understand how Measure T is going to perform. And also the amount of resources needed for the streetscape project influence that conversation. So that's a bit in flux right now. So I'd like to leave it on the plan for now and bring you better data in the coming month or two. But to speak to what I was hinting at earlier, L, the guardrail design for Silverado Trail, this is the $500,000 grant that we received. That is one that will not hit the target date of July, where we think that's going to take. Erica, is that an additional 6 months or longer?
It'll probably take about 6 months. We're not under, we have 2 years to complete that project and to get the construction. So we're on schedule as far as Caltrans. It's just COVID's kind of prioritized our design on other, we're designing that internally as well. So instead of having a consultant doing that, we're doing the work ourselves.
And the funding stays for 2 years?
We have, so from authorization, which was December of 19, we have 24 months to get this to construction. So we've started design.
It doesn't have to be complete, it just has to get to construction within 2 years?
Yes, yes. But we want to get that done sooner than later, so we are working on that now. Between Idris, my assistant engineer, and myself, we're working on that.
The other projects that probably fit the profile of maybe projects that could be slightly lower, although they've been on, the list for a while. Item Y, the Sulphur Creek erosion repair. We did some of the work last year ourselves through permits that we received around the bridge to try to make sure that bridge was more stable. But this is intended to work with the private property owners north and south. Is that right, Erica? Or at least south?
Actually, you got them switched around. So the Sulphur Creek erosion repair, that's part of the flood control project, the ongoing monitoring. It's the Sulphur Creek sediment removal and permitting, 1904. Sorry, just wanted to correct you there.
Now that one's that's east of the bridge, right?
1904, yes, that's east of Valley View.
Mm-hmm.
Can we, I didn't see this, maybe point me to this. Caltrans is motoring forward on the 2 bridges that define our town from the north and the south entry. And many residents have asked me, how much input is the city going to have in that? And I think, it's sort of 3 or 4 years out. But a lot of people want to make sure that we somehow reuse the stone and to have serious input into any design changes, because it's likely that these could become generic bridges, and they're beautiful bridges. They're like Pope Street. They're beautiful bridges. But I didn't see it on the work plan for engaging with Caltrans here, because I would like, I'd like us to make sure we have an eye on that and can facilitate our concerns or citizen resident concerns.
After the last meeting with Caltrans, my thought was to have a citizen community meeting where Caltrans isn't there, so we can really talk with our community about what they think and then sort of help take that. I felt at the last meeting that sometimes people feel a bit constrained in a dialogue with a larger agency. Maybe there's something we can do as a city to gather input from the community where they feel a little bit more open, so we can get an assessment of what the community wants, and then how do we translate that.
Those are projects that are an example of items that are already taking some staff time. It's very early in the process. It's probably a good idea to document that and keep it on the forefront, so that as the issue begins to mature and some form of public engagement matures, it's an example of, for example, if you look up a little bit earlier on now I've missed it. There's one where I think it's related to some state review. So it's W and X, the Bell Canyon intake tower and the Bell House valve replacement. We've compartmentalized the task. So we're not identifying complete the intake tower. We're simply documenting the task to work on, the milestone of that project. And so the Caltrans bridges north and south of town, maybe the milestone for the next 6 months or 12 months is to have community conversations, city-initiated community conversations about the bridges north and south and the attributes of those bridges that we want to either preserve or reuse, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't know how many of our staff participated in the Caltrans meeting about this that happened a week or so ago. But there was a lot of discussion about those bridges and the alternatives and why Caltrans was proceeding the way they are. Now, I agree, it would maybe be a good idea to inform the community of, what was the outcome of that and how can we have more input? But there was just a huge, 2-3 hour online session about those 2 bridges. And a fair number of St. Helena residents were online asking questions.
I like the idea of us having our own process, which also complements Caltrans, So I think
See, that's something that I think should be its own thing here. It's not a CIP project. It's something that's important to us about infrastructure, and we want to make sure it's happening and it's not lost in the middle of all these CIP coded things. And I agree. It's sort of a new item here that we would add to keep track of, because there is so much community interest in that particular thing. Right?
Yeah, certainly having that on the radar so folks know what can see it. It is important. These are the gateways to the town. So.
Okay, having harped about the CIP projects, I do want to ask about the Quinella Pump Station, which is clearly a CIP project. We weren't able to advance it through the Community Development Block Grant, which was unfortunate. But that's something we are asked about a lot, and it can just be reported on more frequently at council meetings or something. But this list isn't particularly helpful to let people know or us know what's going on. So that's why I kind of like the reported out version where people can ask questions and get more information. So is anything happening with the Quinella Pump Station?
Not otherwise than maintenance out there. There's nothing going on because the funding for construction isn't there right now.
So the grant. Oh, go ahead.
The analysis that we've done to deliver the wastewater treatment plant, we believe at the moment will sap all of the available resources in the wastewater fund, and absent a grant to help accelerate the Quinella Pump Station, we think it needs to wait until the construction would need to wait until the bids are in on the wastewater treatment plant before we understand whether it can advance. It's important to have the design finished so that we can be ready to compete for shovel-ready grants or funding that might become available through the federal government through some form of a stimulus package. So it is important for us to tee up some of our capital projects and finish design. So that's been the focus and thinking on the Quinella Pump Station. But from a funding standpoint, the numbers don't pencil at the moment.
Paul?
This raises a question in my mind why you still have August 31st, 2020 as the date. So this is the question. When I went through this and saw some of these dates, I was a little bit uneasy that the staff actually went through these kinds of things and look, that's not going to happen. That date is obviously should not have ever been, put it on this piece of paper. And so I'm kind of now having some doubts about some of the other dates, whether that vigorous work was done. I hate to be critical.
If I may,
go ahead.
It's just the complete design, not to complete construction of it.
Paul, your microphone, Paul.
I understand. I got it.
Okay.
So
we have the funding to complete the design.
I don't think our citizens, our residents over in Quinella Park, though, have an understanding of that, because for a while we had the money, this was a year or two ago, we had the money and we were going to do it, and yay, we're going to do it, and we went it up. Didn't we even go to bid on it?
In January, we had an update on the financial outlook for completing the phase 1 upgrades of the wastewater treatment facility, as well as doing the upgrades to Quinella Pump Station later this year. COVID hit in March. We haven't had this update since then.
Right.
So one of the things I learned from Mark when he first coming in was having these shovel-ready projects on the shelf, and that then you're dual tracking, looking for grants, but having that shovel-ready project. So it sounds to me that we're working on the design, so we'll be in that position, and the date on here still reflects the design being ready. in the next few months, so that can we dual track and look for grants that might drop at this similar time?
And could we, I think we should communicate, whether it's in our newsletter or maybe a special mailing to the Park and Cronulla folks saying, hey, we're on it, but we're not on it right now, because those guys feel like they're sort of left out hanging out to dry, honestly.
And as summer comes and the smell comes back up, it'll be a bigger issue even. So
I was just over there and it smells bad, you know.
The other alternative here is, I mean, and this is something that we would not recommend at the moment, but the other alternative is we move forward with Cronulla first and we park the wastewater treatment plant, which is under a cease and desist order. So it can be delivered because we have funding to do it, so long as we don't do the wastewater treatment plant first, and then we begin to keep an eye out for resources to deliver the wastewater treatment plant, keep our fingers crossed that the bids come in competitive on that project, and that we don't find ourselves in a situation where the bond covenants can't be met. So I think the latest financial analysis we've done indicates that we can't meet bond covenants if we deliver the Cronulla pump station project first, that it really should be parked until after the wastewater treatment plant goes to bid, unless some additional grant funding is available.
I think
we can
have to
also
prioritize the wastewater treatment plant, certainly.
Yes.
But we can also through some form of either a newsletter update or one of our other more of an active live update on CIP projects, talk about that status with the community and special mailing to the neighborhood.
I think that's important, that communication that says this is where it's at. There is actually progress because we're completing the design. One thing I've found certainly in these last few months is talking to people, even if you're not delivering the best news, getting some news is helpful. So I think that that's a good step forward.
So just so I understand the dilemma that we're in financially, I agree with Councilmember Knudsen that at some point in the past, there was a very optimistic view that we had money for design and construction. Is it the point that the costs of the wastewater treatment plant are higher now, and so there's less money available for this? Or what is the thinking? Because I do remember we were very optimistic that we had the money for this project, and that's why we all gave the direction, move on it. So I don't know what happened to that money. Has that money been reallocated to the wastewater treatment plant? Or explain that for me so I have more clarity.
You want me to answer that one, Mark? In January, we had an outlay where we were going to borrow money from the general fund to help fund both. We lost a lot of general fund with the COVID crisis starting in March. So that lending ability from the general fund to borrow from the general fund to pay for the sewer enterprise fund, it evaporated basically in the last 4 months.
It was about $1 million. It's about $1 million project, Erica.
Correct. But we're also looking at, I believe we're going to look at doing the same thing with funding the wastewater plant.
And that's the same issue with this streetscape project that we need to further analyze, is knowing that we've just adopted the budget. Now we know what number we're using for that we're relying on to help balance this year's budget. We still need to look at how we closed the prior fiscal year and determine if our estimate of a $6 million fund balance matches. And then the plan is to use about 1.75 of that, 6 million, so that number is starting to shrink. It doesn't mean that we can't drop lower on our reserves, but the trade-off is we would be using more reserves, and it may limit our ability to deliver other projects that we're going to rely on some form of general fund loan, such as the downtown streetscape project.
Thank you.
So I think part of it also, I think the other answer, Paul, is, a couple of years ago, if we go backwards in time, some of the initial estimates for that project did not seem to be updated for inflation over time. So they got parked in a CIP, several years ago, and then the number was not adjusted for inflation. And so by the time we got a little farther down the road and ended up with more contemporary cost estimates on replacing this, the numbers had grown quite a bit. And it was partly due to the fact that it wasn't adjusted over time in the CIP.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the infrastructure goal? Any specific questions or items that, Mary, I see you smiling.
I'm muting myself for your benefit.
I have a question on this, the Sulphur Creek erosion repair and permitting, sediment removal and permitting. Is that something that we think can happen? I'm looking on here, it's saying it's a revised date. That it's been brought up as a concern every time we head towards the rainier season. Hopefully we'll get that again, the rainier season. Is this something that can be accomplished this year, or is this something we think is not going to make this year?
I've actually reached out to our partners, the Napa County Water Conservation and Flood Control District, on this one, and they're looking at it again. So I think they have more funds, to be honest, and resources. So they are looking at it. As of 2 weeks ago, we had a quick discussion back and forth via email, and I haven't gotten a response back to them, but they were going to look for the original plans with the Napa County Resources Conservation District, because there was a project there done over 10 years ago with Harold Smith and Son, the Raybolds, and there's got to be some plans with the original engineered channel. I don't want to get in the weeds on it, but we're getting assistance on it right now.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Doring?
Just a quick question regarding the downtown bathroom. What is the issue with respect to the electrical? I noticed this was supposed to be completed in June 30th, I guess. And I know there's something, you said like maybe a 3-week delay on the electrical. What is that issue, and are we comfortable that that's going to get resolved fairly quickly?
We had a follow-up earlier this year with the scope of work with our awarded contractor on who was actually going to purchase the meter pedestal that has to go in before PG&E can connect the power to the meter. We ordered the meter, the pedestal. It'll be complete, manufactured in Sacramento on July 20th. The contractor is lining up to do that install the following day, if not that day, depending on when the pedestal will be ready. And then we got to quickly advance PG&E to actually connect the power, and we should be done at that point.
Thank you.
There is some landscaping that's following up. Oops, sorry. There is some landscaping component that we're doing internally. We have a landscape plan we're going to put out there, but we got to get the construction finalized by the contractor.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm planning.
Go ahead.
I'm planning to meet the housing goal, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. So we know that we're actively working on the zoning code, and I know that that is something that's going to push into 2021. I think that we've used mid-2021 for now, and we know that that's a date that might be a little bit in flux. Item B here is something that we have a draft of today that I looked at earlier this week, and we're prepared to meet with Councilmember Knudsen and Councilmember Koberstein probably as early as next week to receive some feedback on how we've taken an early look at organizing the various recommendations, both from the white paper as well as the housing element of the general plan. That will, once we refine that will lead to a number of other implementing actions. The list is quite extensive, and so it probably needs to be pared down a little bit because the housing element and the white paper had a lot of different ideas. And Priya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's in excess of 80. Is that right?
That is correct. It's, I think, 85.
85 specific recommendations. So organizing those and trying to pick the lower hanging fruit, easy implement, lot of return on investment ideas. We'll be working with Councilmember Knudsen and Councilmember Koberstein to identify what those are, and then bringing those various initiatives forward with staff support.
You know, several of those overlap with the first item here. I mean, the white paper itself basically talked about regulatory changes and financial changes. And I thought we gave the consultants, you know, a pretty good list and roadmap of things in the housing element. And so to me, what would be important is that what is there in B that we're not capturing in A that we need to be working on? And maybe separately, just parking the financial part of it so that, because that's kind of separate, the financial recommendations of the housing white paper.
I think D, it looks a lot like B. If we think of the short-term, low-hanging fruit opportunities that come from that discussion. So you're right. And I think earlier this year, pre-COVID, we were anticipating that we could quickly identify some items that could be moved to the Planning Commission. And this is a good example of some work that had to be set aside as the emergency began to emerge.
Well, maybe
so we can consolidate B and D into one or leave them separate.
You know, maybe we should just have a meeting of David and Lester and you and me, and we could go through it, because some of these things, like in the white paper, there was develop co-housing, and, you know, just to check and make sure that the consultant is maybe working on regulations along those lines, and what might be falling through the cracks. And then I would sort of leave it up to Lester and Maya to figure out what needs to go to the Planning Commission. But I guess my point is, I thought we captured a lot of the white paper in the work plan that we gave the consultant and the housing element as well. One thing I would like to talk about C. You know, I know things are sliding, but I hate to see it when things like updating our fees are sliding, because that's a revenue opportunity for us. And maybe you could just let us know what is the issue there. The money to pay for the study, the timing.
I think it was just a matter of getting to a point where the staff had capacity to begin to jump into organizing a couple of different fee updates. So we do have a fee update planned for the council in August. I don't see, I think Mandy is on the line here, but I don't see your picture, Mandy. You could update us on general fees, but I don't think the housing impact fees are part of that. Is that correct? Housing impact fees are not part of the fee update that we have planned for August.
That's correct. The consultant that is doing our impact fee study did not specialize in the housing fee, so we actually reached out to a different consultant to get assistance with that.
And are we waiting to hear back on that?
Yes, I think Maya could give an update. We did hear back from someone who had expertise in that area.
Yeah, I guess looking at C, it is, to me, something that we are discussing in various contexts, and it is more directly related, really, to the zoning ordinance revision. It's a specific item there that seems to me like it should, you know, the part of it about consider updates to the inclusionary housing ordinance. I think that's kind of going on right now between Maya and Ethan, maybe. And we've seen a report from the consultant that kind of recommends revising the whole housing related section of the zoning ordinance. So I don't know, there's some overlap there. That's all I'm saying.
Maya, any update on you want to share? I may have missed that last conversation that occurred between the consultant.
Yeah, if it's related to the housing impact fees, I reached out to Walter Keyser, who's a very renowned economist and very familiar with the local area. He's actually done a lot of work for Healdsburg. And so he put us in touch with some of his staff. And right now where it left off is they gave us a bunch of areas of some data points they needed to collect from us to find out, you know, how much time it would take, the cost for them to do a study for us. And they just wanted to get a little bit better familiarity on some of our current fees and development. So that's something hopefully in the next 2 weeks I can finish wrapping up. It was a pretty big list, and I need some of the help from Aaron. But then I don't know exactly how long it will take them to do their next round, but you know, I would say give it a couple more weeks after the city responds to them.
Erica.
The other items that are on this list are pretty straightforward, and we're happy to answer any questions on those as well.
Barry, were you speaking there? Did you have a thought?
Well, I'm just looking for potential public comment at this time, and I can see Erica Sklar as an attendee, and I was just wondering if I assume she might be here to address this particular.
Yeah, so let's open up the public comment. Thank you. Amalia, are we seeing a hand up at this point?
Give me one moment. Yes, we do have one public comment. Let me allow them to speak. Ms. Sklar, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Oh my goodness. Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you for calling me out. Yes, I am watching this for this section. And I wanted, oh shoot, now what's the last thing that was on the list? I wanted just to comment. Can you bring that screen back up?
This is the ADU is the final item on the housing.
Either.
Okay. Well, can you bring that screen up of your goals again? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I know what it was. I would just, okay. It was the CDBG one. But I just wanted to, first of all, I just wanted to say that the white paper hasn't been like submitted in a full PDF with recommendations. So I don't know if you want me to put that together in a PDF and send it out to all of you, or if you want to wait until you've honed in on your specific recommendations. And then second thing that I thought about was when I saw that you had the facilitate submittal of CDBG grant. I did want to just bring that up because when we were discussing the CDBG for this year, what we saw when we went and looked at who has been getting funding for this year's submittal is jurisdictions have submitted their CDBG applications a day after they accepted, like literally an hour or minute after they opened up for the submittals, which means that these jurisdictions had started planning for this long before, like even 6 months before. And of course, I don't know what the funding is going to be like this year, but usually the CDBG funding, it was late this year, but it's usually in the fall when they open that up. And so I was just going to suggest possibly prepping for that, doing the public meeting, collecting the information about the kinds of projects that could be funded, and then starting to choose what might be a priority for the community to submit in the fall, and then start working on that now so that it would be ready for when they announce it. That's my thought.
Thank you. And so in terms of the PDF that you have, is that something in terms of prepping for that the grant that it's a fairly you already have basically the bones of what would be presented, it's just formatting it for the grant?
Oh yeah, no. I was that was a different issue when you were talking about the white paper, and then it sounded like Mary and David are going to meet on it and talk about some priorities. And then I realized that the last communication that I had with the city was to finalize a graph, a little matrix with some priorities listed, and because those priorities had never been selected, I think because this process had never been finished, I actually never put the whole report together in a PDF that you can forward out to people to review. And I just wanted to know, and maybe I can follow up with Mark. Maybe this isn't the right time to follow up, but I just didn't know if you wanted me to do that before Mary and David started talking about this, or if you want me to continue to wait until your final priorities are set.
Any thoughts from the council?
Erica, I recall the PDF matrix because you gave it to us around the time we started putting together the scope of work for the zoning ordinance. And I believe that piece of it is already in the hands of the zoning consultant. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, you are correct. There is a matrix, but I had a column for the prioritization of it. I could just eliminate that and then it's good to go.
Yeah, I see it. I have something called White Paper Appendix Matrix, and it's a 2-page thing.
Right.
And it calls out the page in the white paper that it's on and what the objective is. And I think the consultant has this, but I agree it's good for the council to look at the prioritization.
So can you get that to Mark Presswich?
Yeah. I'll bundle it up and I'll send it off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Erica.
And we have tried to identify similarities between the white paper recommendations and the housing element. So the document that council members Koberstein and Knudsen will see will identify some similarities between various initiatives. We're also going to try to add a layer of, easy, medium, or hard degree of difficulty with some of these items. So any other comments on the housing items?
We do not have any public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands here, so we can move on now to goal 3.
So this is the organizational performance, also communication and regional collaboration goal. And if you can scroll down a little bit, Priya, and then maybe zoom in a little bit on everything but the notes. I think we're on am I on a different page?
Let me know if I'm looking, I'm on goal 3,
right.
Starting with climate action. Is that where I should be? I tried to zoom in.
Yes,
okay,
that's good. If you could show a few more of the rows there. So with both with the adoption of the new general plan, there are a number of chapters that have actionable tasks. And I've taken the liberty of adding a couple of these to the list here to help us organize the implementation of those tasks and recommendations. So first step would be to work with our committee structure and commission structure to receive some feedback on some initial staff review, but to receive feedback from the Parks and Rec Commission and ATSC on these two different ideas, these two different chapters, and to begin to organize and bring forward actionable tasks. So that's the intent behind A and B here, and want to make sure that the council feels comfortable with us moving forward with those ideas and that approach.
I'm fine with that, but isn't this where A would go into our goal 6?
Yes. And I think C may be something that could be relocated to the housing goal, potentially, unless we see it as more of an organizational performance issue. But the design guidelines, which in some ways have a housing link.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some of them are going to be part of the ordinance if it makes sense for them to be, as opposed to design guidelines. So.
Item D is an update that we've been involved in for more than 12 months. Before the COVID hit, we had distributed the updated version to all of our bargaining groups, and we're awaiting feedback on comments. Because of the COVID emergency, we have not pressed the bargaining groups for feedback. And as we begin to emerge from the emergency, we will begin to revisit receiving feedback on a draft revised handbook. This is a document that hasn't been updated since the mid-2000s, and we needed to capture, probably fair to say, over 100 different actions of the council over the last 15 years, and place that into an updated employee handbook that should be updated every time there's a change affecting the handbook. So it's hard to pick a date on this one, but it's something that, and it also went through a transition of attorneys. So the version that we have today was prepared by the prior law firm, and we're awaiting feedback from the bargaining groups. And happy to answer any questions about that one too. But it's an important task for us to improve our organizational performance so that we don't miss issues. And the cleanup of this has revealed a few areas where we missed a resolution or two that did impact a policy issue.
And is there, I'm sorry if I missed it, is there a timeline for that coming back from the bargaining groups?
I think we provided them initially about 3 months of time to look at it. I think we need to ask one more time, give them maybe a month or two to finalize comments before we try to wrap that up and bring it to, make sure we reach a tentative agreement with each of them and then bring it to the council for approval. So while I have November here, I'm hoping that we're under promising and we'll over delivering.
Thank you.
I have a question about item G, which is something we've been thinking about doing since like last December. And what's your best estimate now? I see it's adjusted due to COVID. Is this something that's actually going to happen in August now, or is it after that?
So on both Parks and Rec and on ATSC, we'd like to, you're right, this was something we were planning for late fall, and we've had a few things happen between now and then. And with ATSC, there's a couple of vacancies still. And with both of them, I think our interest is in starting with a what we would call essentially a governance meeting for them to review their charter, walk through some best practices, which are essentially what are the attributes of high-performing commissions and committees, talk to them about that, very similar to what we've done with the council and with the planning commission in the last couple of years, but have not extended to ATSC and the Parks and Rec Commission. We probably will, I think and have a preliminary conversation with them about ideas of interest that they have an interest in working on or participating in. I think the charter for each of these, I think it's fair to say it does deserve a careful review by the council. And Councilmember Knudsen had suggested that late in 2019. There's some ambiguity with respect to some of the language. With the ATSC committee, it's the product of the combination of two committees that were combined, and I think it's fair to say it may be time for us to take a careful look at their language. And I know that there's been some interest in a more active role for the commission and the committee. So we're planning a meeting on July 20th with the Parks and Rec Commission that will begin to get into a little more of the detail, and I believe on August 5th for the ATSC. Is that right, Priya? August 5th?
That's correct.
And then after those two meetings, I think it may be time for us to schedule a joint meeting that we had considered with a joint meeting for the ATSC and the council, and a second joint meeting with Parks and Rec and the council. That would follow within maybe 4 weeks.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, I have the sense that they would just generally like to talk with us in even sort of an informal manner about their work and, what are their concerns or their gripes or whatever. And instead of sort of hearing them through the back channel, we could just talk about them and talk about, their work and how they can be most useful. I mean, I'm pretty disappointed that we lost so many ATSC members, and it's going to make it difficult until we build that group back up. Not really easy to make progress along those lines, but I think we should have a meeting with them as soon as you think it's convenient.
Yeah, I would support just more communication and direct communication may be helpful in that.
So we think July 20th for Parks and Rec and August 5th are the two dates that we're planning to have very similar types of conversations. That would be the first step before a council joint meeting.
As soon as I got on that ATSC board, everybody started leaving. So I'm not sure what I did or said. I took a shower. I tried to remain, cooperative and quiet.
It wasn't about you. I got to say, I think the challenge for our two commissions, aside from planning and the library commission, it has its own. But I think for Parks and Rec and the ATSC is they do work and they worry that we don't pay attention to them. And so I think dialogue is great, but I also think we should pay attention to them. So, they're there for a reason, right?
Vice Mayor?
Just back to the goal A here. I'm not sure this is appropriate, but I'll just say this. Oops. Okay. I guess I want to make sure that we're not losing sight of the opportunities that we have now and that are not waiting for the plan to be more developed. So when we're designing our wastewater treatment plant or Crenella or looking at purchases of equipment and those kinds of things, I hope someone can give me a sense of optimism that we're looking at solar and we're looking at, hybrid vehicles. We're looking at charging stations, all the different things that we could be doing now and not necessarily waiting for a plan for someone to tell us to do that. I'd like to have a little bit of comfort that we're kind of thinking about that, in terms of use of solar and charging stations and all the other things that we could be doing when we're designing our projects now. I'm talking about city projects and buildings.
I think it's fair to say that we're thinking about that actively. a good example is when we I think it came through the Climate Action Committee participation at the county level, but the idea of joining MCE Clean Energy and being one of the early cities to jump into that 100% green portfolio. Today we had an interesting conversation about the deployment of water recycling infrastructure associated with the upgrades to our wastewater plant. And I know that we've had some conversations about a formal policy on banning synthetic pesticides. We've implemented an expectation internally that we will not purchase synthetic pesticides like Roundup, but we could formalize that fairly easy. And in addition to that, we've had some conversations for a while about enhancing our water neutrality ordinance, which would allow for us to, go beyond just shower retrofits, toilet retrofits, and really take a look at landscaping and add exterior landscaping as an option, which really delivers a lot of value from an environmental standpoint. So there are a number of issues that we're always thinking about from a climate standpoint, and I have to look at all the various initiatives in the general plan again. But I think it's fair to say there were a lot of good ideas and easy to implement options there. And the first step is just getting that organized and beginning to press the go button.
And that'll all be under a new goal 6, right? I mean, what we're talking
right. About. All of that can be moved into a goal 6.
Right.
Particularly the short-term. So the short-term items, I would imagine we would want to put those in the current work plan. And the longer-term items, or revisiting it next year, would be an opportunity to put the year 2 or year 3 type goals in there, tasks.
And touching back on the pesticide issue, as we talk about it for the city of St. Helena and what we can do in St. Helena, it's also wanting to advocate to the county that we'd like to ask them to start moving in that direction as well. So I've been trying to talk about it. I think there was some support for looking at this letter to the county that would sort of highlight what we're doing, but also be asking the county to be moving in that direction as well. So as we solidify our city goals, how can we also extend those out and hopefully get everybody on board with that conversation around the county?
Any other questions or feedback on the items under goal 3? We are, as you've been, I think you've been copied on a letter with respect to item L. We are going to be documenting the status of one of the larger non-conforming, potentially non-conforming businesses in town, so that we set a baseline in 2020 for what we believe their active use permissibility is. So that's Sutter Home.
Then I had a question on E, the prepare, present to the employee succession plan. Whatever we can do, in my opinion, in terms of retaining employees and institutional memory, it feels like we've been able to do that to some degree over the last number of years, helping make this a place that we can keep employees for longer. So this looks like it's moving along. Is that my understanding? And it'll sort of sync with the other elements of this in terms of the handbook and that sort of thing.
It's something that's been on the work plan for a little while, and I'm the bottleneck, as I mentioned in the past. It probably needs a refreshed look at that. And frankly, when we were talking earlier this year, before the pandemic, there were probably some ideas that we wanted to bring to our bargaining groups that speaks to and would speak to employee retention. But that's a concept, that's a plan that is in draft right now. It needs my review, and when it's finished, it can be presented to the City Council.
Okay. Any other thoughts on goal 3 from the council? I'm going to scroll down and see. Seeing no hands. Okay, Mr. Presswich, I think we can move on if everybody's okay.
Okay. So we're on goal 4, long-term economic sustainability while safeguarding St. Helena's unique culture and quality of life. I mentioned the fee study. I believe we're anticipating bringing that to you in August for adoption. Mandy, is that accurate? I don't remember which of the 2 meetings we were targeting.
And we are bringing it on August 11th to get some direction on cost recovery. So we'll be presenting the full schedule to you that's been prepared to this point.
Item B has been on our work plan for a little while, and it has been set aside due to competing priorities. And fair to say the finance department's been a little busy this spring. It's been difficult to find additional time to develop a policy in this space, but it's something that we still think is important and want to see as a higher priority. And C, of course, is probably increasingly an important issue. We've had some successes with changing some of the code under the prior general plan, but some of the next steps, I think, are to inventory those, market that, and Councilmember Koberstein has also suggested some site visits that we haven't taken the time to organize yet. So I think there's a lot more work that can be done in C, and with a business recovery effort underway now. And if you've looked at our website lately, we've updated the link on the left side to deal with business recovery. It's something that it's a topic that is going to become increasingly important. And we have a draft. I have a draft of a survey for D. That was the feedback that the council had for us was, let's talk to the merchants first. And that was about the time that COVID was beginning to arrive. And we do have a draft of a survey that can be deployed relatively soon.
That seems like something that could maybe wait a while. If we're going to launch the sidewalk replacement program in the middle of the winter, I don't think anybody has the time now to fix their facade before that happens. And I don't think they'll be interested in trying to do that work while we're, tearing up the sidewalk in front of them. So I would say that would be something you could maybe move into the yellow category for a while.
Has there been any interest in that? Has anybody come forward at all with anything on that?
I don't think the businesses are knocking on our door, but the council's direction to the staff was, let's knock on their door and learn whether there's an appetite for various improvements, and then that would provide the council with more data and information to decide how to deploy a program like that, if at all.
And it may be that it's a little overwhelming at the same time as the streetscape, but there may be some synergy in doing, somebody might see that it might be the time to do something if they're already under construction, but it could be that it's too much at once too, so.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty hard to launch a facade renovation while the sidewalk in front of you is under construction. So if we're looking for work that could be relaxed a little bit, I think this is certainly an item.
And another couple of examples of actions that the council's taken just in the last couple of months are the urgency ordinance has been very helpful to businesses that needed to use space differently. And then the business assistance loan program. was developed very quickly and deployed. So these are two things that we've actually done sort of in this space of economic sustainability. And I think fair to say there's more to come as we continue to move through the pandemic. But I'm comfortable moving that to the yellow category, and we can update that. We were thinking that E could potentially come off the list because of the work of the Financing Infrastructure Task Force. This was something that has been on the list for a little while, but want to receive some council feedback on E.
Yeah, I certainly have some thoughts on that. Mary, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, we had that Zoom meeting and we lost power and everything just kind of blew up in our meeting with the task force. And I do think we should, at least as a council, look at everything they recommended and figure out what we're going to do, beyond saying thank you for the work. So revenue is certainly important, and I think it should go in the green category, but maybe with a later date on it or something. Doesn't seem to me like it should be paused.
I think it's a critical conversation, and as we're seeing through COVID and our climate discussions, having a conversation about economic diversification and looking at a number of different revenue streams, sort of this concept of not putting all of one's eggs in one basket, certainly around the county, at the supervisor level and in the city of Napa, it's the discussion of how do we create a balanced diversification so that we can be resilient through any scenario. So I think as we talk about revenue, and also how does revenue align with our climate goals, so that if we look at one revenue source, is that the most climate friendly? How do we reconcile those issues? So I think as we head into the climate discussions, it does tie to revenue, and also the potential for diversification for resiliency through any scenario such as this. So I think it's an important conversation to kind of expand a bit.
To go back to the task force meeting, I did have a note near the end of this discussion that I did want to talk about the follow-up on the task force work, which was, the cornerstone of that is City Hall and some associated with infrastructure. And I was looking at item E here as a little distinct from the task force follow-up, where this was a fairly wide open discussion about potential issues like a transfer tax and other revenue streams that might be available to the city if we were interested in pursuing things like that. Some of the ideas from the revenue task force from a few years ago. So if I think it's important for us to have a green item related to how do we continue the conversation related to City Hall replacement, which has some infrastructure and some revenue issues associated with it. But I guess I'm also curious to know, does the council have active interest right now in exploring other new revenue ideas over the next 6 or 12 months that we should, this is a pretty broad statement here, and I'm happy to bring you a lot of ideas, but if you're interested in a lot of different ideas, we can bring some of those forward. But if you have specific ideas or want to narrow the focus, that might be helpful too.
Well, that was helpful because under the notes, I thought when it said duplicated the task force, I thought they were same items, and the task force never really dealt with some of those issues, but frankly, a lot of them are ballot measure type things, transfer tax, and I guess we should look backwards from when something like that could be on the ballot and then plug in time, to see if we want to talk about it and advance it. But of what they recommended to us, I think we're basically left with a little bit more sales tax increase in transfer tax. And that's about it.
Has there been any further discussion about annexation in terms of discussing with Meadowood or where we provide services? Has the county engaged with us at all on those issues?
I don't think there's an annexation, an active conversation. We have had some conversations about water and also, wastewater, but not an active conversation about annexation. I don't think there's general fund revenue opportunities associated with that. And annexation is not the county's decision, it's a LAFCO decision, and there are a number of challenges associated with annexation and negotiations that would need to occur with the county. So anything about any conversation about annexation, first of all, we don't have a sphere of influence. It would need to be added first, and then it's a long process, so it's a long way off, and the general plan does include some study areas. So studying areas is probably a good first step at thinking about issues like this, but I think in terms of a short-term work plan, just following through on the general plan recommendations to study the issues are probably the most appropriate now. And I think annexation is something that's a very difficult issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any other council thoughts here?
My memory tells me that Councilmember Knudsen was interested in coming up with some alternative revenue plans. I think we had this conversation about a year ago. It's I think it was partially a driver for the task force itself. And so I'm wondering, is there still an interest, or is there something being formulated there, or am I misunderstanding what was happening about a year ago in terms of, well, I like to call it Plan B, but people don't like that. But some other alternatives. Has there been work on that?
Not formally, if you're asking me. Not formally.
Well, yeah.
But I, there were some experts that I engaged on my own. I fed some of those into the task force folks that I spoke with when they interviewed me. Some of those discussions sort of I think got a little short-circuited, but I'm happy to raise those when we have a chance to talk about this again. There's also some businesses that I've been informally talking to that have an interest in St. Helena that would diversify our economic base, and I can't talk about that publicly. But, part of our challenge is we're sort of under warehoused, but over Main Streeted. We have sort of, given the size of our community, we have too many storefronts, but we don't have enough warehouse space, given the way that businesses sort of operate today. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. That's a challenge. I mean, if our industrial park had, I would say, a third more space, there'd be some things to announce. But we don't. And unfortunately, a lot of our small businesses move to the industrial space from downtown in order to get cheaper rents. So, for example, we have the Gutenberg Press, and we have, we have a couple of fitness facilities down there. There's some offices out there when it's really more sort of industrial, but we sort of moved to office, small business, small retail. And, if I could find 10,000 square foot warehouse right now, we'd have a very exciting announcement to make, but I can't find one.
Well, I think continuing to keep that sort of stuff on the map and the radar, and looking for, being innovative in terms of how we create a business and a sales tax mix that gives us some resiliency. It's to me deeply worth the conversations, and looking for ways to find ways to implement.
Could I recommend that instead of formalizing this as a specific task, as ideas arrive or we see opportunities, that we bring those to you in the course of council meetings? unless you would like us to specifically identify some additional new revenue focus.
No, I like that idea. I like the idea of focusing on how are we going to pay for City Hall and working off of the work of the task force as the first conversation. And then explore these other ideas as they come up.
And I think it's fair to say we should have a task force item added to the green, which is just the follow through on the task force, which will set up next steps on our conversation about replacing City Hall and the financing associated with that. And I would also add that just in the last couple of days with the changes at the state level on the COVID emergency, a couple of businesses have spoken with the staff about parklets on Main Street. And we understand that Caltrans rules require the city to construct and lease the space. And so there's a process associated with that. There may be other options for a couple of these restaurants, but they're in need of space right now. And I think it's fair to say it's not a red item for us because there's active interest. It's a green item at the moment, and we may be wanting to bring you recommendations relatively soon with respect to a parklet or parklets on Main Street.
I think anything we can do to be helpful in this circumstance and move things as quickly as possible, I'm certainly in favor of.
I hope that also includes the potential for Hunt as a big parklet. I think that's a great space to allow some of these creative uses by some of our retail and restaurants.
Right, and I know. Go ahead,
Mary.
That doesn't really involve Caltrans approval, does it, for us to go ahead and use Hunt?
That's something that we can do now, and with the urgency ordinance that the council approved, that allows our staff to work on those types of ideas now. And it's been some of them have already been very helpful to businesses, the permits that have been issued.
And is money away available in terms of that as well, folks looking back there?
Yes.
Great.
So I was going to move to goal 5.
Everybody good? Yep. Okay.
So I know we'll come back to the title of this, Youth and Families. We have a draft of stakeholders, that's B, that, and this is Council Member Chateau and Vice Mayor Doring are the two council members that are attached to, as an ad hoc council subcommittee attached to this goal. We have a draft of a stakeholders group that we want to share with you, and we have a concept of a survey instrument that could be in partnership with the school district deployed when school begins at maybe the junior high and maybe the high school level. We think that conversations and understanding the current landscape will help us not duplicate work that's already occurring, but add value to areas where there may be gaps. And those conversations will produce ideas and next steps that we would be able to advance. And they're probably, fair to say, a lot of terrific ideas that could be developed in this space. So the starting point is really to get organized. And yes, it has been something that's been on the list here to do. And we feel that we're about ready to be able to invest more staff time and working with our council members to move this forward. But there may be other specific ideas that you're thinking about that we would want to add to this goal. I think we heard a little bit earlier today about health and welfare.
Anna, did I see your hand?
I just had an idea while I was looking at this again that it would be so important to make sure that we're partnering with organizations like Up Valley Family Centers and that we're being inclusive with our Spanish-speaking and Latinx population. I know we always have that as a goal, but when I was going through this and reflecting back on our public school population and how many Spanish speakers we have, I just thought it would be wonderful if we could include, to make sure that we're reaching that demographic throughout this process, early in the process.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Doring?
Well, I was actually thinking along the same lines as you were speaking, and actually right before you were speaking, and I would be happy to recommend adding some language that talked about the underserved segments of our population.
Great.
Yeah, I would support that, certainly. I also know that, and it's, again, COVID has highlighted these issues in terms of mental health services for all ages, but I'm making sure that that's highlighted as a priority. We know that the repercussions of what we're going through now are not going to be short-lived, and so wanting to make sure that that's highlighted and included, and again for all, and certainly our underserved populations. Any other thoughts here?
Perhaps we could work with Councilmember Chateau and Vice Mayor Doring to refine the various tasks here, as well as bring the council an updated goal statement for Goal 5.
Okay.
Offline? Okay.
Great. Thank you.
On the other category, these are just items that, a couple of these are things that we're thinking about, and I have there's a augmented list on my notes here. But the council had a generator noise ordinance conversation on October 22nd last year. It didn't produce any, that conversation didn't result in the adoption of an ordinance. It's something that was potentially an item that we want to bring back with more options or thinking. Is that still something of interest to the council?
This is the noise ordinance, Mark?
Yes.
Generators, where they're placed and how.
I think it's going to come up, as we get deeper into this. Anna, do you have some thoughts there?
No, I was just going to say, I think I heard just the other thought too about so many of the generators being polluting. So is there a way to look at having something with this that they're also cleaner generator options?
One of the things that came up in some of these discussions was the idea of these microgrids that are tied to folks' homes and that they tie together. There's some concepts, some pretty innovative concepts. But I think, the generators bring up the noise issue, the pollution issue. So that overall discussion, how we move forward, we know potential PSPS, and it's a coming conversation. So how do we synthesize it and look at these issues together?
We also had a model ordinance from Santa Monica that we could have based our work on. There might be others.
Mary?
I just want to say on the generator issue, this is on our other list and what work are we going to do? But that is the current technology for people. The micro thing is not out there. And frankly, I don't know what you can do about the noise. These things are built at a certain decibel level, which apparently is within our codes. And I'm sure if I moved mine 3 feet further away from my neighbor, it probably wouldn't make an appreciable difference on anything. And so if we're looking to add more work, I don't think it's a priority to focus on that issue. If the power goes out, the generators go on, and there's not much you can do at the moment. And I don't even know how we can prohibit people from buying what's out in the market if it's currently meeting our decibel requirements. So.
Yeah. Yes, with all due respect to Mary, Councilmember Coverstein, I would not agree with that kind of a way of looking at it. I think if we set the policy and set the law, then folks will have to respond to it, and the marketplace will then respond to it. I think you can go out and find various generators. Some are extremely quiet. I've been exploring this, and others are noisier. And from my perspective, it's a very serious issue in our community. Noise, especially with a PSPS, is extremely disconcerting if you have a neighborhood where you've got 10, 11, 12 generators going on in their front yards at all hours of the night, and some of them are $80 machines and some of them are $5,000 machines. I do think we could spend a little time in helping people to find peace of mind on this issue, because it's I experience it, and I know it's not really something that's pleasant. And I think we need to get a handle on it and give folks direction about where we can find a happy medium in terms of what is available in the marketplace and how we can regulate it.
I think the most important thing we could do on generators is make sure that they are getting permitted. A number of them are going in, and they are more portable. And in close quarters, like say at Vineyard Valley, they are more of a noise and disturbance issue to people than other things. Some of the, if we're going to lower the decibel limit in our building code, we can certainly do that. The question is there, how soon will it take the market to respond? And my only point is, I don't think this is something that we can do something really helpful about in the short term, other than making sure people are getting the permits, because people are putting them in. There are some that are gasoline powered versus natural gas. And I think we want to make sure that what's going in is safe and meets our current codes. And if there's something out there to modify the code, I'm more than willing to look at it. But the complaints I've been hearing is about lack of permits.
Yeah, and I would support that's an absolute necessity to make sure that these things are permitted and done correctly. We hear the stories about when they're not. So
I think when we had the conversation in the fall, I anticipated we would want to bring something back before the PSPS events were upon us, and then the COVID environment arrived. And so I think relatively soon we should agendize a conversation that sort of revisits the conversation from October, adds a little more of a contemporary update to what's happened at the city level. As you know, we adjusted the fees a little bit last year down to make it more affordable, to ensure that people they were coming in to have those properly connected. But I'd like to potentially bring that conversation back relatively soon. And in that space, I've invited PG&E to provide the council an update on the investments they've made to segmentation of their system and cameras and the various infrastructure that they've been working on over the past year. So that conversation that update is scheduled for August 11th. And Mark Van Gorder and PG&E staff will be here to share a similar presentation they made to the county.
Mark, do you think there'll be a room on that agenda for this generator discussion to sort of tie into that? Is that agenda got a little space on it?
I need to talk with our planning director to get a little more organized. So I would need to speak with her about how we might bring you newer information on that topic. So maybe not the 11th, but the 25th would maybe be a little easier.
Okay. I think in August, we're starting to get into the season, so that'd be a good time. Now, Anna, and then I'll go to Paul.
That was just a hand movement. Sorry about that.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. I just would invite us to reframe this issue a little bit in terms of how we approach folks getting generators, it would be a great idea to start maybe investing time in how we can create incentives for folks to get generators that are environmentally superior and very quiet. You know, I know we don't have a lot of money to throw out there, but look, if I went in with my neighbor and say, we're going to share a portable generator, a really nice one, and maybe the city's going to pay a couple $100 to help us get that, I would do that, right? Maybe I would, we'll see. But, you know, try to look at it as, rather than a punitive measure, look at it in another way. I know regulations are sometimes considered punitive, but creating ways for people to go, yeah, I think that's a great incentive. I will go and get that because the city's helping out. Just like we did with the downtown businesses. It's a way of helping folks along. That's just another way of looking at it, because I am sensitive to the fact that not everybody can afford the higher end quality permanent or portable generators, and they're expensive. So I'm cognizant of that issue, Mary.
Well, you know, maybe it's some, you hate to pick a product on the market, but maybe some little research could educate people about what, if you're going this way, what's the preferred product as far as noise and whatever. You know, I think that's fine.
And I like your idea of reframing it in a positive way, saying, how do we be innovative, work together so that everybody gets served in the best possible way. So I think that's a good way to frame it. David?
Yeah, and so there's also just the idea of sort of best practices. For example, you can always screen things in terms of the distance from neighbors and from bedrooms. And you can also do berms. I mean, there's ways to sort of mitigate some of these issues, and it'd be interesting for us to look at best practices in other communities around this, knowing that apparently there's a crush of applicants in the city for generators, people trying to get ahead of this. And I get it, you know.
Any other comments on this? Okay, I think we're looking pretty good.
Thank you for that. A couple of other items before we conclude. We have a concern that we may need to bring you forward a 5G ordinance to essentially preempt telecommunications companies from attaching infrastructure to our historic poles and or setting large infrastructure in the right-of-way. And there are cities that have brought forward ordinances that explain where and how that infrastructure can be added. And I think there's work for us to do in that space and bring you something. So that's something that, unless the council doesn't want us to bring you something, that's an area where I think we need to bring you something relatively soon before we have something unsightly attached to our infrastructure.
Yeah.
Money Way, garbage and recycling consolidation. We did apply for a grant. There may be additional work coming associated with that. I don't know if Councilmember Koberstein has an update, but that's something that's on the radar.
Yeah, we're scheduled, the board, the JPA is scheduled to look at these applications in August and award funds. I think our date might be August 17th. And when we first looked at this, there was some talk that you would spend the money and then get it back. But I think in this COVID environment, you know, there will be some thought that we shouldn't have to make the city come up with the money first so that we can pay them back. And if we can start some of this, it would help a lot with what we're talking about improving the outdoor space where some of our businesses could expand to. And it's really a part of, I think, phase 3 of the streetscape, if we ever get there or want to.
Right.
So I'll give you, I can update you in August on this.
Okay. VMT thresholds. Maya, I don't know if you want to comment on, or Erica, on current VMT issues, but they're essentially, the state law is changing. and there's an expectation that we change with it. And so there's work to do in this space.
Really?
Yeah, well, I think we brought this up because it was one of the reasons why we went back and amended the Hunter EIR contract not too long ago, because the state is moving the cities from a level of service methodology to VMT, and that's more, you know, a climate-friendly approach because it's really trying to change the behavior of how people use transportation and commute back and forth. But having said that, for a small community like St. Helena, it's a whole different platform of how we look at what thresholds make sense for us, as opposed to being like a city of San Jose that has already had multiple EIRs done using VMT methodology. So where we are is, I believe there's a consortium in the county working with MBTA to come up with a model that we would all share in the cost. And I actually emailed Aaron today to find out if he had heard any updates on any progress. Everything went really quiet when COVID hit. A lot of the meetings, I think we had attended one meeting earlier this year. So I believe also the state may have postponed the deadline. That's the other thing I was trying to find out, because the original deadline, I'm not sure if it says it on there on our matrix, was July 1st of this year. So I'm happy to bring an update back to the council as one of my updates as soon as I'm able to confirm the deadline for compliance and also what the county's doing, or MBTA, excuse me.
Mary?
No, my recollection is that when we approved the general plan, the last thing in the EIR, one of the major shifts was to go to VMT instead of level of service. And the Planning Commission talked about it a lot. I mean, they spent a lot of time looking at that EIR. So they might be a very helpful resource about where we are going and where the plan is already kind of forcing us to go.
Thank you.
So in addition,
Go ahead.
In addition to what's listed here, just a couple of other policy items that will be coming to the council relatively soon that are not on this goal list or work plan. The vaping conversation that we started earlier this year, we intend to bring back to the council relatively soon. We may be adding to the agenda for next Tuesday comments associated with the LAFCO Municipal Services Review for water and wastewater. We know that we have a police policy discussion planned for July 16th, and there may be additional conversations that come after that. On the July 14th council agenda, we also have a Parks and Rec commission recommendation on trails, and there would be work associated with the trails concept that we would add to the work plan. And then we talked earlier this afternoon about pesticides and whether there might be an interest in adding a pesticide concept to the climate change goal, where we would formally adopt a policy that explains what is permitted and what's not permitted. And secondly, the water neutrality ordinance and how we achieve water neutrality. I think for a while now we recognize that extending that to landscaping can be advantageous for reducing water usage in town.
Okay.
So we would add that unless there's preference not to at this point. We would incorporate those ideas into the work plan.
Yes, I think so. Certainly on the vaping issue, and then anything related to water as we move forward is going to become very pertinent.
So our next steps will be to refine this. I think in a couple of cases we have some homework to do in conversations, and then the intent would be to bring this back to the council. I think I've also heard that the updates on CIP projects where we've done a live Q&A, I think those have worked really well in the past, and we can try that out in the new Zoom environment as well. Relatively soon, we'll give a couple of our staff members some time for a vacation, and then plan something relatively soon on updates on some of these projects. And we do have, as you know, a couple of key projects underway right now.
I just had one final comment.
Mm-hmm.
Since this is the month where we have our canceled meeting, and I do realize a lot of staff people are taking vacations. I think we have a good almost 4 weeks between council meetings. And I think it would be great if we could begin to work back to publishing earlier with what we can, so that people have more time, to look at it, and eventually maybe get caught back up. I mean, I realize the whole last 4 months, 5 months have been crazy, but I am hearing a little bit about, not a lot of advance notice of what's coming or time to look at it. So even if the agenda is there without this stuff, I think it'd be good.
And we made some improvement this next council meeting. I think that agenda for the 14th was published about 10 days out. Is that right, Cindy?
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of reports that are going to be added. As I mentioned, one may be the municipal services review, and I may want to add another COVID update to cover some of the changing environments that we're experiencing right now.
And that was certainly one of the biggest, we've had many improvements. That was a great improvement for our community feeling engaged and included in the conversations, having that earlier agenda. So whatever we can do to keep that up, it was a great move. So thank you.
It's been very helpful.
Any other thoughts here?
Yep.
Okay, I guess we're all done. Thank you very much. You're waving goodbye. Okay, so we'll see you in a few minutes at 6 o'clock, everybody. We'll adjourn the meeting and see you then. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for the presentation.
You're welcome.